It is an honor to be here. I'm happy to meet each and every one of you. My paper is on liberal environmentalism. A few weeks ago, there was this controversial speech by a young Swedish activist, this Greta Thunberg. My students were very passionate about it. When they were reporting on climate change, they have shown her video on TV. My intent this morning is to be able to present what Ms. Thunberg is really against. Okay. I try to look into the concept of liberal environmentalism. More prominently, this is what you call green politics. Liberal environmentalism is really that compromise between preserving the present global economic order and at the same time protecting the environment. And so we see an irony. While we intend to preserve the environment, there is also that assertion that we have to maintain what is currently happening. Corporate interests, for instance, interfering with our desire to be able to protect the species. And so, in that sense, it's ironical. Thunberg is saying that global leaders have not been doing enough. So, her concern really is that it's a contempt and at the same time a call for action on the part of global leaders. Of course, we have many examples. Donald Trump is most prominent with respect to this. Although we have to understand also more closely and very seriously why the position of at least two U.S. presidents have been very prominent against global climate agreements. First is with President George Bush in the Kyoto Protocol. And right now, President Trump, using Article 28, is doing that attempt to leave the Paris Climate Accord. So, we need to understand, however, how we must define development. Okay? My understanding is that this notion of sustainability wants to define the notion of development beyond the economic definition. And so, it wants to look into this idea in a holistic way. But what do we mean by development as something that is holistic? At the same time, it is also a kind of understanding that is pragmatic. Because while from a theoretical viewpoint, it is good to look into how we might be able to find that concept of sustainability working even in the third world. There is also that pragmatic concern insofar as even if there is environmental advocacy, if leaders are unable to implement policies, because these policies are really difficult to implement, especially in third world societies, considering the situations of people and the need, for instance, to explore better ways to develop the country. I talked, for instance, at one time with the assistant of the president, and he said that there's really not much that the city of Davao, the city where the president of the Philippines right now comes from, that we can do with the proposal to put up a coal-fired power plant. He explained to me that, you see, we need jobs, and to be able to produce jobs, you have to have industries. To be able to have industries, you need energy, and to be able to have energy, you need to put up plants. We do not have the means to buy what he calls green energy. And so it's for this reason that these leaders, policy-wise, are hard-pressed even to accept dirty technology like coal, because there is no other means, because primarily they want to, number one, consider the interests of their constituents, and that means to be able to give them jobs, put food on the table. And so in that sense, the environment takes a back seat. I just okay. So these are two activists. If they turn around, you'll realize that the two girls might be wearing Levi's. Levi's is a symbol for capitalism. There's nothing wrong with it. It's nice, really. At the same time, it's a very young girl and realize that they're also very active on social media. So it's really ironical. These are two people immersed in the modern ways of like human society, human civilization, but at the same time, they also have this, I think, very important and fundamental concern to preserve the earth. That is Ms. Thunberg. Now, there are criticisms against Ms. Thunberg, okay? One of which comes from an op-ed written for the Guardian. So, the idea is that maybe while Ms. Thunberg is very emphatic in her speech, if you consider really in the last 500 or 100 years, there has been so much progress economically. And people have been lifted out from poverty. So in the West, for instance, we see changes and advances, most especially in this high standard in terms of the ways of living. For instance, in Sweden and in Norway, these countries that are highly developed, they also have very good democracies. And the reason for this is, of course, development and democracy must go together. Without democracy, you cannot have development. And without development, really, you cannot have a real democracy because ultimately, the idea of responsibility is connected with the capacity for autonomy. And when people are unable to make the right choices politically, the reason for that is they are also affected by their circumstances, economic circumstances that allow leaders to exploit and take advantage of them during elections. And so, when we consider in that regard the criticism of Thunberg, it might hide something insofar as in the West we have also observed changes. So, not only in the ways of life of people, but also for that concern for the environment. For instance, Peter Singer donates something like 10% of all his profits from the sales of his books for environmental causes and other advocacies. And so, we can look at it from two ways. The individual has something that he can do in terms of being responsible. At the same time, we can also look at it from a collective point of view. States and societies and policies, international trade agreements, for instance, can consider the well-being and welfare of those who have been disadvantaged in the third world. And yet, my concern here is environmental degradation really a matter of individual responsibility? In our countries, most especially, if you go to a depressed community, most likely it is a dirty community. And we oftentimes blame people for their lack of discipline. So meaning to say, they have been unable to utilize most fully the value of their autonomies. People have this throwaway culture. So that as individuals, they do not really care about their future, much less about the environment. But is it really the case? So my argument is that I don't think that's really the problem. This is one of the problems. This is an example of, say, an environmental disaster. Mark Copper in Marinduque. I suppose there are what we call state interests that collude with corporate interests. So meaning to say, some of our leaders actually have rent-seeking motives. So meaning to say, they kind of appropriate state and natural resources for their own good. During the time of the former dictator Ferdinand Marcos, in all board of directors, in all BODs, of every lacking corporation in the Philippines, there is a Marcos sitting. So meaning to say, he ensures that he is able to benefit from all lagging activities. And right now, from a 95% forest cover, the Philippines has no less than 5% remaining. So meaning to say, it's not just one individual or the poor, it's actually politicians, and in that regard, it's systemic and structural. And when people are unable to do something about structures, policies, and laws, it means that we don't have a democracy. And when you do not have a democracy, there is no meaning to individual autonomy. Because there's no way that people can intelligently participate in public discussions. if you notice, a lot of people appointed in our government, not only in this administration, but even in past administrations, these are not really the most intelligent people. The most intelligent people teach the students who are actually children of rich corporate and industrialists. And so, in that regard, we do not only have a problem in terms of really having that vision that will enable the country to sustain its growth, but rather we really have the wrong people in government. In my university, for example, I don't know if they'll be able to see this on YouTube, they have this, the university is losing a lot of money because of its loans for buildings and structures that are not really necessary. And it was so funny, I read in one of the memos of the president that the air conditioning from 16 degrees to 19 degrees now, it should be at 23 to 25 degrees. Okay? That's actually useless because outside it's only 26 degrees. Why don't you just throw away all airports? Okay? I think the problem lies with the choice of the wrong people that he put in the administration, and for that reason, there is a misappropriation of money and at the same time, the wrong priority. So sometimes you think it's individual. What happens here is that students will suffer. And so you make the individual pay for something that they really have got nothing to do. And so it's the same thing. The private sector, the government, we have this too much politics. And so I suppose it's not just individuals, but really there are type of politics that kind of reflect also the absence of say, the moral fortitude that is necessary if you are to pursue the ethical ends of society. So, the Kyoto Protocol, very prominently, Bush rejected the Kyoto Protocol because he said that if he signed it, it will affect jobs growth in the U.S. Okay? My understanding is that he did so not because of his whim, but because it's what really his constituents wanted. Okay? So the idea is that it might affect the growth of the auto industry in the U.S., and it is in that respect that I suppose that he refused to sign the Kyoto Protocol. He wanted China to sign, but China and India also did not want a part of it. The reason there being is that they argued that a lot of these first world countries have actually enjoyed what we call a historic pollution, meaning to say they have benefited from industrialization, and it's just now that China and India have been able to pursue this industrialization, and as such they should not be made to pay for this. Okay? And so precisely the problem therefore is politics. It's not individuals, it's not just human responsibility, but it's about global politics. And the US of course can do what it wants in the world. It decides the future of this globe. Paris Accord. The same thing with President Trump. He said that the Paris Accord is bad for US investments. I don't know, did you vote for Trump? But it's like
sound like I voted for Trump.
he's like our president. A lot of people don't like him, but I assume also there are people who also like him because he won actually, and they are just caricatures actually of our deepest desires. This might be bad, we might have evil motives. It's just too bad that they become the symbols or representations of those things that the majority would not want. But I think from a political end, his position is understandable. Okay? The political, of course, is different from the ethical, but politicians are expected to make decisions even if these decisions might not follow an ethical perspective that is acceptable to everyone. Now, if we try to broaden this problem, there are two important papers on liberal environmentalism actually, and I read it just this morning, last night, because the whole day yesterday I was thinking of what I was to bring to my wife. By John Narbison, I believe you're familiar with this, the case for pre-market environmentalism, and Tony Smith, okay, the critique case against pre-market environmentalism. This is fairly simple. So, Narbison will argue that if you want to protect the environment, you have to strengthen what we call private property rights. Okay? Because the problem is with the tragedy of the commons. You consider an area, and if nobody owns it, when everybody owns it, like the atmosphere, it will naturally be destroyed because no one is taking care of it. And so the argument for free-market environmentalism is simple. You have to make incentives so that people will, in that regard, protect the environment. This is ideally the very thing that is about the polluter pays principle. In this polluter pays principle, if you pollute the environment, then you pay for it. The problem, however, with such a kind of principle is that there is no guarantee that corporations, for instance, will want to absorb what we call intangible social costs. They might want to consider really cleaning up a particular area like what BP does, or what BP did, I mean, but the social costs are tremendous and it's something that you cannot really calculate. Well, but the bottom line here is if we go back, this very notion of sustainability really, which is what green politics is all about, while we are concerned with the environment, the problem, however, is that we have to still believe in a free-market economy, which means that we cannot really compromise economic development. But with economic development, however, there is always that consequence to the environment. So, is this concept really of sustainability helpful and applicable if we consider the overall picture of it? So, now, if we consider markets, okay, so a lot of the problems in this world are actually because of markets. You have like the 1929 Great Depression, which some theorists would also say gave rise to Nazism in Germany. And you also have the US subprime collapse in 2008, which has also resulted to a lot of troubles in many other countries. You have the 1997 ASEAN financial crisis, which, of course, these things, Wall Street makes imaginary money, but they make actual money from this imagination. The problem is the real people will have to pay for these things. It's all about the market. It's all about the smart guys wanting to control the world. And so, my proposal is, as against the market, we go back to indigenous wisdom. So we have Professor John, we have Professor Bayod, of course, Father Dexter. Precisely, I don't have to explain these things, they have explained, but I was just going back to the root cause of our problems, the systemic and the fundamental issues that we have to consider. Ideally, of course, when we refer to indigenous wisdom, it's about the respect for life, the respect for nature. And according to Carl Gaspar, a prominent anthropologist in Mindanao, for the indigenous communities, land is sacred. So, because land is sacred, there is, in that regard, a sense of isolation of their community from the modern ways of life. And I see this in our children, in the kind of values that we impart on them. A lot of these kids right now are so engrossed with social media. There's nothing wrong with social media per se, but it's about their inability really to discern the right from the wrong in terms of these values. So I have no problems with Professor Chutatip, the use of the TV and the cell phones, as long as you're happy using your cell phone, your TV, and as long as you do not lose the sense of, what's really important to us human beings. It's about these values that we consider, relations in the community. These things are intangible, and the problem therefore is that the onslaught of capitalism and the onslaught of consumerism kind of impacts on the culture of people, which diminish their understanding of what life really is all about. And so lastly, what is our way forward? So this one, I find that there's much to do in terms of developing the paper. Of course, it is not easy to simply say that we go back to indigenous wisdom, that we go back to our old ways. I cannot imagine my wife going back to the old ways. She'd kill me, but I do not know. But it's really the difficult part of the paper. Where is the way forward? But at least the important thing is that we have, I suppose, we've seen where the problem is, and fundamentally we have to look for better ways to address these concerns beyond the concepts of economism and beyond the market. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you, Ryan. Very forceful. Any comments? Questions? I'm just going to Skype into President Trump, see if he'll join.
Sorry.
Yeah, please, we have two on that side. Go ahead.
Yeah, just on one.
Thank you.
One point on the trying to get big business and corporations and so on to help solve the problem. I mean, this might work in some instances, but I've got serious doubts about the free market actually helping a lot. In Australia, we've got enormous water problems. I don't mean we've got enormous lots of water, we've got hardly any.
You guys have plenty, it's all around you.
It's all around us, yeah, but try drinking it. And we have big conflicts between people who want water for the environment because our rivers in a lot of areas are dying and we've had millions of fish dying and so on. But people, the corporations and so on now who own a lot of the irrigated land don't want water taken away from irrigation to be used for environmental reasons. And the government a few years ago came up with this brilliant idea of opening water up to the free market so water became a commodity and people could buy it and trade it and so on. But what's in fact happened is that people have been speculating on water. People who actually own the land, at least the small landowners, haven't been able to afford to buy the water, so they are losing their water. Corporations or big business people are speculating on water, so you've got all this water being traded, but it's not actually benefiting anybody except people making money from it. Now, I'm not saying that in all cases using the free market model would be as bad as that, but it's certainly been a disaster for water at home.
Thank you, John. If I may cite the case in the Philippines, maybe people in Metro Manila can relate to this more. It's been privatized, water in the capital, but even with billions of pesos of investment, there is no guarantee that there's water on their top. That only means that primarily these corporations are more concerned about profit more than delivering this basic utility to people. And that's precisely the problem. In contrast, in Davao City, there was this attempt to buy the water district. Of course, the mayor then did not want it. And so there is a communal approach to problems, and in that regard, it's something that you lose when you make decision making dependent upon the decision of the board members of these corporations, because they will consider first and foremost the interest of the corporation more than the interest of people. There was this debate in Davao City, for example, because the power utility also wanted to use the river. And the water district also wanted to use the river for the households. And so there was this debate of whether it's electricity or it's water. At the end of the day, what prevailed was water, because you can live without electricity, but you cannot live without water. So the solution there of the local government was fairly simple. You have to consider what is more important to people and what is more basic. More than, say, the money that might come in, they rejected the proposal of the water, of the power utility. I guess, Professor Hartship.
Yeah.
Do you want us to talk into this so you can hear? Or?
Yes, please.
Check. Oh, that's loud. That's really loud. Two comments. One is the President Trump, when he speaks publicly, he says the Chinese are responsible for it's a Chinese hoax for climate change and all that, but the actual policies of the Trump administration is that the climate change is real, but we're not going to do anything about it because it's already going to come. Did you hear about this with the emissions? So the emissions for cars or the safety on cars are up for re-legislation so the rulers can make the rules. But the Trump administration said, oh, it's already too far gone, don't worry about it. So that's the actual policies of the Trump administration, which is very scary. The other one I wanted to share is a story. There's a Chinese story, maybe you guys have heard of it, where the young man goes to his father and he says, how much profit would I get from, doing that land there and selling it at the market? His father said 10 times. And he said, what if I went into business being a merchant and selling, do you know this one? And his father said, oh, that would be like 10,000 times. And then he said to his father, what if I were to put politicians into the state and control the state? His father said, oh, that would be innumerable profit. This reminded me of your Marcos thing. And also, in America, in the U.S., we have a researcher by the name of Thomas Ferguson called the investment theory of politics. You've heard of him. Can you just comment on that in the Philippines?
Yeah, I think a lot of these problems, even Roger discussed it, there is this intrusion by big corporations into these indigenous lands. And it's a pity right now because if you go into these hinterlands, the forests are being replaced by bananas. What they do is enter into the picture. They get the indigenous people to sign contracts. They just pay as little as 20,000 pesos. That's even less than $1,000 per hectare for use in 1 year. After 10 years, they leave the plantation. And with that, indigenous communities would no longer have arable lands. But these people, because of the wrong mindset, and I suppose these things cannot happen if you do not have what we call the collusion between politicians and these corporate interests. So meaning to say, what has happened is that some of these politicians have become spokespersons actually of these corporations. And the thing is, they are also part of the business, and it is for that reason that we need a real democratic framework insofar as people cannot really meaningfully contribute. There's that barrier in terms of language and education, and so therefore, when there are public discussions while there are representations from IP people, these people really do not speak up because they have no means. And so who speaks for them? You have these non-government organizations, advocates, and they speak. But they too, they're being controlled by their own motives and interests. So you have a problem really that's very basic. So who should live and who must own this land? And yet it's politics that gets in the way as regard to the right ethical decisions. I suppose it's a fairly same thing when you speak about politics, whether it's in the West or in poor countries like the Philippines. Because the problem with politics, of course, is that there is self-interest. And that self-interest, most of the time, is hidden under the guise of these advocacies and this propaganda, when in fact, it's simple. You look at a city, there's like skyscrapers, but they really do not represent development because a lot of sacrifices have been made in order to build this building. And yet these sacrifices are not seen. Laws do not see these like day-to-day situations of people because the problems are structured. The problem is that we only see people, but really the big enemy are these systemic and fundamental issues that we have no means of addressing if we look into the situation of these poor people who are the ones affected by these wrong decisions of policy makers. Hey, yes, Professor.
Yes, Tamar.
I have a question.
Yes,
Regarding man-made environmental disasters,
yes.
can the state claim damages from the corporate who's responsible for such damages?
Yeah, I think with Mark Copper, there were fines because we have a mining act and they required the corporation to pay for the cleaning of the river. So, but after that,
The cleaning.
but after that, I was mentioning social costs like the relocation of people, the displacement of people. I don't think there's money for that from corporations because most of the time, a lot of these people lack insurance, and in that respect, there's really a limit. There's also this mining disaster in Baguio City. A very prominent businessman. He owns the biggest telecoms in the Philippines, but he also he has interest in mining because, as they say, 1% of the global population owns 82% of the world. In the Philippines, only 10 people own the whole country. So, in reality, there was no money really for the communities. There was money for cleaning up. And what they do actually is they also hire their own contractors. And so they actually earn from their own funding and budget. But at the end of the day, you do not have the futures of these people guaranteed because of lack of access to this. The way government should be able to intervene, which is to provide for, because you see, not only that, the future generations, their children will be affected. But the future cannot sue those people who are doing these problems right now. So,
But the state can.
yeah, the state,
Representing the
yeah.
interests of those.
Yeah, but
future
it's very
generations.
limited in so far as the mining law in the Philippines is concerned.
Yes.
Alon, please.
Yes, Professor Mel.
Yeah, I read Greta's transcript of her speech at the World Economic Forum. Greta is 16 years old?
16.
Greta. Two of the major criticisms of Greta are, number one, she went to the World Economic Forum. Number two, that she spoke fallaciously. So there were many fallacies in her. Especially her speech prior to the World Economic Forum, because they said there were a lot of misericordians, appeal to emotions, appeal to people, blah, 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 but less substance. Well, she's young, so what to expect? The problem is, when she delivered a speech at the World Economic Forum, her speech was obviously has been sponsored by business enterprise who are selling alternative energy sources. So Greta's argument became commercialized. She was commodified by these companies that are selling alternative energy things, solar panel, blah, 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 that targets emissions and so forth. So now she was destroyed by her very own advocacy. Not like Malala, remember Malala?
Yes,
The lady. So she still is very active in her advocacy for the education of young girls. But the problem with Greta now is she is being used. And I think she allowed herself to be used because money is flowing in. So the problem with advocacies like this is they easily become prey to commercialism, to commodification. So even environmentalism now is a big business thing. So apparently you cannot do environmentalism, you cannot be an environmentalist without being supported by people with corporate interests, and that's a big problem. Say for example, there are researchers saying coffee is actually good for your health, but when you look at the declaration of conflict of interest, it was actually sponsored by Nescafe. So it's the same thing with environmentalism. So that may be one of the loopholes of liberal environmentalism. They they fall prey easily to corporate invasion. So that's the problem with the Greta now. I don't know what's the movement with Greta's advocacy now. I stopped reading updates about her after the World Economic Forum speech, but
she used a catamaran going back to Sweden instead of the plane. And then if you imagine the consequences of that, if we do not use planes, it will destroy the global economy. Because, I think there must be a way of distinguishing advocacy from actual policy making. And of course, from her end, to be able to inspire the young and to be aware of our environmental problems, that should be enough. But for us, big and old people, I think we have to look into this more closely and consider these serious matters. And at least it is a wake-up call, moral or otherwise, on the part of global leaders to really see if we have been doing what is necessary with respect to our attempts at correcting these historic injustices when it comes to environmental degradation and the need to preserve and protect the environment. But I suppose there are also sustainable ways and communities that a lot of corporations, even in the Philippines, are doing in order really to have a more integrated way of life. But although at the same time, we realize that it also entails a lot of sacrifices, because at the end of the day, we understand that corporations really only want the money out of it. But at the same time, it's also important that we should be able to use them if by means of doing so, it will and might contribute to the making of better policies and the implementation of these policies that will serve best the interest of, say, the environment. We can talk about SM, for instance, doing advocacies on children with special needs and the environment as well, and a lot of these corporate real estate entities doing advocacies for the environment. If they plant 1, 2, 3, 5 million trees, that I suppose that should be welcome, perhaps.
And what is so funny about what they are doing Greta's advocacy is, like the European Union now, they are calling the same animal with different name. Like in the EU, they are planning to change global warming into global heating. But is there any, difference? Meaning change in terms sometimes is enough for them to change policies.
Too many mics.
It's-
Turn the mics.
It's so these are the responses they are doing now. Euphemizing terms that are normally negative.
Sometimes terminologies help, but at the same time, also what matters is, the price in the packaging, so it's the substance that really matters in the end, how, say, policy makers really have the guts and the will to be able to implement. We can talk about Boracay, for example. Almost everybody do not like the president of the Philippines, but when he implemented this cleanup of Boracay, it's only then that people realize it's becoming very dirty. And I suppose if it were not for him, there wouldn't be any ways of closing that prominent island for 6 months. But of course, there are ethical issues, but the main thing there is if it did something good, and then that should be a welcome development, even if it is at the expense of so many things, perhaps.
Ronnie first, and then John. Thank you.
Yeah. So there are actually so many criticisms on Greta. Aside from I don't know if it's already proven being funded by corporates and whatnot. Just ranting and being angry without really giving sustainable, viable alternatives and whatnot.
But that was a short speech, in the same way as
Yeah.
Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I have a dream speech. We expect people to, in the end, really to take part.
Yeah, but my point is, let's remember that Greta is a child. Okay, people have been expecting her because she spoke in the World Economic Forum and so many other big forums to give alternatives that are scientific, to give alternatives that are sustainable, to give other alternatives and whatnot, to provide real specific scientific etc. evidences. But I think people are not seeing the point why she's there. She doesn't have to give this scientific data. She's 16 years old. She's a child. She's not supposed to give alternatives and sustainable proposals. She's just there to represent anger. Because it should be the adults who should be thinking about sustainable alternatives. It should be the adults who should be doing these things, because they are the ones who are actually damaging, controlling, and moving the world. So I think that's what Greta represents, and I forgive the flaws on scientific data and whatnot, because going back to my main point, she's a child. And she's not supposedly there. She's supposedly in school. And it's supposedly the adults who should be wasting their time and cracking their brains and doing research and trying to solve these environmental problems.
I wanted to interrupt you because I live in Sweden for a year for my studies, and also in Norway. I gave that same argument to my teacher. My Swedish professor would not agree with you. I told him, we cannot allow 9-year-olds to join in democratic deliberation. They said, why do you say that? So why do you put a hindrance in terms of understanding on age? A lot of people are very bright, very intelligent while they're very young. So in that sense, being a child is not really a problem, because even a 1-year-old can teach us the value of life. The need for a mother, for instance, it does not come with age. Intellectual seriousness and the ability to criticize and analyze doesn't come with age. This whole thing, you have 35 years old, you're still youth. Mother Dexter is, I think, is 40, but it takes like a very young man for enthusiasm. And there are people when you see them, you see problems, but there are people when you see them, you see solutions. I think it's just prejudice against children. There's what we call ageism. When you're old, there's prejudice against being old. When you're young, there's prejudice against being young. The important thing there is that you are a human being. There's something you can say, whether it's good or bad. Okay? But of course, she's not a scientist. What do we expect? The advocacy is good, but for us, of course, we have to do our part. And if we can imagine how we look into this thing from the viewpoint of research, and that's our contribution. Her contribution, of course, if it were another man, say a 50-year-old man talking that way, the world wouldn't listen. But here comes a 16-year-old woman. That is so much about, because that's the that's the function of language. So the function of language is not just to denote, it's to be able to connote situations and give us the proper context. It's good because a young man tells that the world is dying, even if it's not true. In the same way as a young kid will tell you the world will end, you will still do it because that is your child and there's not much that you can do. That's my take on that.
Okay, John?
Yeah, just a quick point. The point's been made a few times that the environmental movement and sustainability and so on is being taken over by big business and so on. Now, I think it's a shame when that happens, but on the other hand, I think given the amount of money that mining companies and others pour into keeping things going the way they are and trying to deny all the problems, it seems to me that it's probably not such a bad thing because at least it puts a bit of equality in between the two sides or in the two sides, so at least the issues are being talked about a bit more.
Somebody else who hasn't spoken like to make any comments?
Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Just before you go, I have also some comments. To feed into this discussion about the age. So, if we believe that in equality, then it doesn't matter what age, what piece of paper that you hold if you happen to graduate from university, which somebody will soon, or whether or not you're a girl or a boy, or whether you're from Sweden or from India. It matters what you say, and I think this diversity of ideas is critical. And maybe, as Ronnie said, some people's role is to show anger. Some people's role is to show scientific data, mathematics, to draw a painting, to write a musical song, to develop a drama. We all have different arts, and I certainly think there are scientists at the age of 10 who are able to propose new ideas and data, and there are scientists at the age of 60 who have failed to do so. There are politicians who are quite young, and politicians are quite old. And the question also to take money. Money is always unfortunately going to open you up to the criticism that, as John pointed out, it tries to balance. There needs to be an investment in our future, and some companies do that. Perhaps it would be a wise advice for other environmentalists to avoid taking money from companies with a direct linkage to your income, as Marlon pointed. There are plenty of other companies who would be willing to sponsor you. It may be better to state, look, I need the money to go to the Economic Forum. I don't want to take money from anyone with an direct interest in this industry or debate, because it will affect my image and the image of the message, and then somebody will find some money for it. On the other hand, if we really believe that solar cells are the vision of the future, then we can take money, can't we? And we can promote them, but promote it actively and say, okay, solar cells are the vision of the future. Or if you believe that nuclear power stations are the vision of the future, then you will take the money to do so from the nuclear industry. Of course, that may not be a choice that I would make, but it may be better than taking money from a petroleum company. Maybe. And construction industry has so much corruption, energy also. So this is a challenge, ethical challenge for us. Perhaps some
Yeah,
reflections on
I
this.
suppose it's a question of intent. The intent is good as long as those individuals who directly contribute, as you mentioned, Professor, do not have any involvement in something that is dubious, then I feel that that is something worth accepting. I can even make myself as an example. You see, the dean in my university is my arch nemesis. So he refuses to give funding. He refuses to sign my travel papers. Where should I get money? So I got money from two important sources, the church and the state. I have my friend, Father Dexter Biloso. He represents the state. A congressman in our district is also my friend. He also gave me some money. Is that a bad thing? I believe if we are to look into the circumstances and how I have been enriched and how, as human beings, so really believe in something that I think it's worth pursuing. So, because it's always a question of goodwill. So, I suppose politicians are bad, and of course, Father Dexter is good. He's here, can say bad things. But the basic idea really is a question of how we might be able to influence the world in a positive way. I think it's wrong to simply criticize and say bad things about corporations, because there are well-meaning people and there are individuals who really, like us, academicians, there is no singular claim to moral correctness. So we have our own stakes in this world, and as such, we believe individually in the principles that we have, in our ideologies, but even with the differences, I suppose, in terms of intent, we're very clear. We want a better world for everyone, and I suppose that is something that is worth doing in the end. Because this is a kind of experience that cannot be made available to everyone. And so it takes a lot of guts also on the part of individuals and society as a whole to really consider what is best for everybody.
Okay.
Thank
you.
I
Yes, Ronnie?
need to also add another point. I think one of the things that we should also look at here is the culture that revolves around politics, business, and advocacy. There is this general belief that politicians are all corrupt, that businesses are only for profit. People have been accepting these ideas for years already, and the problem with that is that it becomes part of our culture because we accept that politicians are corrupt. So when politicians do corruption, let's say, yeah, that's been happening for years already. When businesses are just for profit, we also accept it because that's happening already. I think what we should do here is not accept it, to deny it and say that it should not be happening. We should be able to come up with a culture where politicians, businesses, and advocacy are together. There are new business models like impact investments. These are investment ventures that are for impact in societies and environment and whatnot. We should be talking more about these new ideas and accepting this, and not accepting that the world is corrupt or business are corrupt and whatnot.
Thank you, Ronnie. You can have the final word.
Thank you very much. Thank you.